This is Hillary Clinton talking to one of our favorite propagandists, a man who sounds like he's very authoritative, very careful with his speech, while he, just lightly here and there promotes the massacre of millions of people. Just like here and there, Fareed Zakaria.
In the book, because it was quite striking to me. I co-teach a course with the dean, a very distinguished political scientist at the School of International and Public Affairs.
Doesn't that tell you something, that they want war criminals teaching classes at Columbia?
Called Inside the Situation Room. We'd love to have you come some class, Fareed. Incredible students, very large lecture class, like 375 students from across the university, mostly students from SEPA, the school we teach in. And we taught the Wednesday after October 7th. And it was a very somber, difficult class. We hurried through our prepared curriculum, and then we basically sat down and answered questions for 45, 50 minutes. And the questions were really raw. I mean, we had a student from Palestine, a Palestinian student. We had a student from Israel. We had students from across the Middle East. We had students from Asia, obviously the rest of the world, struggling to understand what all of it meant. But it was a respectful, informative, open dialogue.
Where I manufactured consent for murdering babies.
And literally at the end of it, the students applauded. That was on Wednesday. Within a few days, we were doing an event, and we started being protested, the dean and I and our guests, and being screamed at, being called, all kinds of names. What happened in that period? And
so basically, the first time she talks about where it was her class and it was all very respectful and everything, that's what we call a self-selected audience. You see, that is an audience. She said 375. That is an audience of the 375 students, no matter where the F they were from, who decided it was nice and pleasant to take a class from a lying war criminal covered in blood piece of human garbage. That is who's in that class. If they were anything other than that, they would have either quit the class because they're like, I can't listen to a war criminal speak propaganda, or they would have stood up and screamed at her at some point during the class, in which point they would have probably been kicked out of the class. So that discussion that was so polite and wonderful and they applauded afterwards, that is all her fans. It doesn't matter where they're fucking from. I don't care where they're from. If they chose to sit through day after day of garbage from Hillary Clinton and believe it like it's a real thing that they are learning and growing from, then it's a self-selected audience of either people who are just sick and are willing to endorse genocide, or people who are super, super dum-dums. And look, I was in college. I was a super, super dum-dum then. That's what I was. I wasn't awake to the realities of our world, and I'm sure that's what a lot of them are. Doesn't matter if it's at effing Columbia. Don't care. Still super, super dum-dums who probably think Hillary Clinton is she's just a near billionaire who's trying to help people in the world. But let's hear what she says the difference is between the people in her class and the people outside her class who started screaming names at her, probably names like war criminal, probably names like genocidal maniac, those kind of names. Here's the difference.
The best I can sort of unpack it is that there were already existing groups within our country, and particularly on certain campuses like Columbia.
Oh, there were existing groups that were against people in Gaza living in an open-air prison under brutal Israeli occupation. Those existed before October 7th? What? How could there be?
Who had talking points. They had a plan for protest and just...
Talking points in this case just means points. They had things they said. They used the word genocide several times. Nobody does that unless they are being told to, except for the fact that it's clearly a genocide. And so that might be why they're upset and using points that they said. They had talking points.
Disruption. And I watched it sort of morph into something that was not student led, even though students participated, but which had outside funding, outside direction. And I still to this day, I'm not quite sure of all that was going on with it.
Outside funding and outside direction. Well, first of all, she has no evidence of that and no proof, but let's say there were people outside of Colombia that wanted to join in, that wanted to help out, that wanted to be a part of the protest to stop a genocide. Is that so crazy? If I myself had shown up to Colombia, I'm not near there, so I didn't, but if I myself had shown up to Colombia and said, good for you guys for standing up against genocide, does that mean they are controlled from the outside? Does that mean that I'm an outside agitator? Or does that mean I'm also against genocide? And maybe I like to support those who are fighting against genocide and fighting against Hillary Clinton, who stands for all of this and helped make sure all of this continues when she had power back in her days of power. And she still has power as a face in our country that people listen to. I don't know why, but they do. And so she's using her power right here in this interview to run cover for G-side. Okay, so it's such a garbage argument.
And a lot of students were caught up in that. And
caught up.
A lot of the videos
Caught
on
up.
social media.
I don't know what happened to me. I just got caught up in being opposed to ethnic cleansing. I don't know. Someone just talked me into not liking bombs blowing up children. I'm not sure how they did it. I don't know. I just got caught up. I just like a wave. I was just like, where am I going? Why am I against bombing children? What happened to me? Oh my God, happens to the best of us.
Media gave not just a one-sided view of the conflict, but a totally anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, not just pro-Palestinian.
No, it's pro-Palestinian, but pro-Hamas is a better propaganda talking point. Here's the thing is when you've done a successful amount of propaganda, you lay kind of a propaganda framework. You can then say pro-Hamas and it just scares everyone. Oh my God, you like terrorists. But that's because everyone thinks Hamas is just terrorists. They don't think about the reality of Hamas, which is a government in Gaza. It's a government that run Gaza. It doesn't mean I endorse all their actions. It doesn't mean I'm a fan of Hamas. But they are not just the militant fighters. Hamas was the government in Gaza. Hamas was connected to the hospitals and the schools and the universities and everything that went on in Gaza, as are the governments in most areas of the world. Guess what? The U.S. government, and I mean state governments as well, and city governments, all part of the U.S. government structure, they're involved in the hospitals, the schools, the everything, the garbage pickup, the health care. They are involved in all of it. And very similar to Hamas, yet instead, because the propaganda is effective, we just hear, oh my God, you agree with what, the hospitals in Gaza? You must be a pro-Hamas terrorist.
A lot of the videos on social media gave not just a one-sided view of the conflict, but a totally anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, not just pro-Palestinian view. And for me, it was distressing because, look, I have my own opinions formed over many years. I am willing to sit down and have a conversation.
I have my own opinions formed over millions of dollars.
With anybody. But it's difficult to have conversations with people who hold strong opinions with no factual and historical basis.
Yeah.
And so in trying to talk to students, not just at Columbia, but elsewhere, I would be met with slogans. I would be met with attacks and, very inflammatory language. And when I would ask, well, what about, do you know what happened in 2000 at Camp David? No. Do you know what happened in 1947? No. Do you know?
Yeah, most people absolutely do. And first of all, what happened in Camp David and the two-state solution, etc., it's all garbage to basically allow for the ongoing, refugee camps of Gaza and the West Bank. It's at no point were they actually pushing for a two-state solution. I've mentioned many times on this show that Israel would never and will never support a two-state solution. In reality, they'll say it a lot, but in reality, they never will. Because once Palestine becomes a state, even if it were just that tiny bits of Gaza and West Bank, and it were called the state of Palestine, and it was a legitimate state on the world stage, the moment that happens, they have a right to a military. They have a right to have food go in and come out. They have a right to have their people come and leave. That's right. If you are a nation, one of the UN rights you have is that your people can come and leave, assuming the rulers of said nation allow them to come and leave, such as, but obviously that's very hard in some places like North Korea, where it's very difficult to come and leave. But that would give them that right. Israel could not stop them from coming and leaving. And Israel could not shut off their water supplies. All of this would be rights they would have if they were a nation. So it has never been actually supported by Israel or by the ruling elite of the United States. Then she says, do you know what happened in 1947? She doesn't fucking know what happened in 1947. In 1947, the UN with 33 nations voted to create Israel out of nothing and say, oh, all of the land that houses Palestinians with people living in houses, with whole towns, is now Israeli, and they can do whatever they want. And the Israelis, guess what they did? It's called the Nakba, okay? Thousands were murdered. Hundreds of thousands became instant refugees. Over time, it's now millions. That's what happened in 47, 48. And she's acting like, oh, these students, they didn't know that. Oh, she's just such a piece of shit.